My name is Rachel Bennett. I'm 34 years old, and the strange thing about the moment your life quietly begins to fall apart is that it doesn't sound like a disaster when it starts. There's no shouting, no glass breaking, no cinematic storm rolling in outside your window like something out of a movie. Sometimes it starts with a message, a single message, short, casual, almost careless. The kind of message your brain reads once, then again, then a third time, because something about it doesn't quite land right. 3 days ago, I had a man I thought I was going to marry. Or at least, I had a man I had built my future around. His name was Ethan Cole. We'd been together for 3 years, engaged for 7 months, living together for almost 2. Long enough that our routines felt permanent. Long enough that I had a drawer in his studio and he had a shelf in my closet. Long enough to believe we were stable. Safe. Real. I work in fire suppression systems. Not glamorous, I know. Most people's eyes glaze over the second I mention sprinkler grids and pressure valves. But it pays well. Union rate, plus side contracts doing inspections. All in, I clear about $88,000 a year. I'm not flashy with money. I drive a truck that's old enough to vote, my one quiet flex, no debt, and a savings account that would have made my father proud. And my father was not a man who impressed easily. Ethan taught yoga. He owned a small studio, rented space, ran classes, had a loyal group of regulars. He made around $45,000 a year, maybe more with private sessions and online content. He had built something of his own, and I respected that. I really did. He was also the kind of man who used the word journey without irony, who said namaste to delivery drivers, who once described a burrito as having chaotic energy. And somehow, I found that charming. For a long time. The wedding was set for mid-September, 9 weeks away. Budget $31,000. I was covering 22. His parents contributed 6. He was covering the remaining 3 from his studio income. The venue? Booked under my name. My deposit, my credit card, my signature. Primary account holder. That detail didn't seem important at the time. It would be. We had agreed on 130 guests. Split evenly. My side. Family, college friends, co-workers, people I had known for years. Some since childhood. His side, family, friends, and what he called his studio community. Clients, other instructors, people he had grown close to over time. The guest list had been finalized for 2 months. Seating chart done, head count confirmed, deposits paid. Everything finished. Locked in. Then came Tuesday. I was at a job site, standing on a ladder, running pipe through a ceiling grid when my phone buzzed. I checked it without thinking, and there it was. A message from Ethan. Hey babe, I gave the venue a new guest list this morning. I had to make some adjustments. Took off about 40 people from your side to make room for more of my yoga community. I know it seems like a lot, but these people have supported our journey so much, and it wouldn't feel right not having them there. The venue said it's totally fine. Love you. 40 people. He removed 40 people from my guest list. Without asking, without discussing, without even a warning. He just did it, and then told me after the fact. Like he'd changed the napkin color. I don't remember climbing down the ladder. I just remember my apprentice asking if I was okay. Apparently, I made some kind of sound. I don't remember the sound. I remember the feeling. That specific, unsettling sensation of something shifting under your feet, like the ground of your life just quietly gave way. I sat in my truck. Read the message again. And again. And again. The names started lining up in my head. My best friend since I was 9. Gone. 6 co-workers who had stood beside me through a decade of work. Gone. My entire college group. Gone. My cousin, who had already booked an international flight. Gone. Replaced by people I had met, maybe twice. People whose last names I didn't even know. People who knew Ethan as the guy who led their 7 a.m. flow class. I sat there for 10 minutes, just breathing, thinking, not reacting. Then I typed 2 words. Interesting choice. He replied almost immediately. A heart emoji. Then another. Knew you'd understand. And that was the moment something in me settled. Not anger, not even hurt. Just clarity. Cold, precise clarity. I did understand, just not in the way he thought. I spent my lunch break making calls. First, the venue. I introduced myself as the primary account holder. Asked them to confirm the guest list change. They did. Then I asked a simple question. Was that change authorized by me? Silence. Then a careful quiet. No. That was all I needed. I asked about the cancellation policy. 9 weeks notice, 60% refund. I'd get back $4,500 from the $7,500 deposit, lose $3,000. Process the cancellation, I said. Effective immediately. She hesitated. Are you sure? Yes. 14 minutes later, I had the confirmation email. Then the caterer. Then the DJ. Then the florist. By 2 in the afternoon, there was no wedding left. Total loss? A little over $5,000. Did it hurt? Yes. Did it hurt more than standing at an altar surrounded by strangers while my closest people sat at home? Uninvited? Not even close. I didn't tell him. I went back to work, finished the job, went home. Ethan was at the studio, teaching his evening class. I ate leftover pasta, watched 2 episodes of something I couldn't remember 5 minutes later, and went to bed. The final menu tasting was scheduled for Thursday, 2 days away. And I already knew exactly how that day was going to end. Thursday morning, Ethan left the apartment early. He moved around the bedroom with that calm, floating energy he always had when he believed the world was arranged in his favor. He had showered, blow-dried his hair, put on one of those soft cream sweaters that made him look gentler than he actually was. While fastening his watch, he glanced at me over his shoulder and smiled. "Today's going to be beautiful," he said. Beautiful. That word stayed in the room after he left. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee cooling between my hands, already knowing that by noon, whatever version of our life he thought still existed would be gone. He leaned down before leaving and kissed my forehead. Not my mouth, my forehead. Like I was someone already receding from him. Then he grabbed his keys, told me he was going to do a sunrise meditation before heading to the venue to get in the right energy, and walked out the door. I listened to the apartment go quiet. Then I got dressed for work. I did not go to the tasting. I drove to a commercial site on the west side, spent the first hour checking pressure gauges and pretending my chest didn't feel like it had been wrapped in wire. At 11:13, my phone started vibrating in my back pocket. Ethan. I let it ring. A minute later, it rang again. Then again. Then again. On the 4th call, I answered. The sound that hit my ear was chaos. He was crying or yelling or both. His voice was echoing like he was outside, maybe in a parking garage or near the loading area behind the venue. "Rachel," he snapped, breathless. "What did you do?" I kept my voice level. "I canceled the vendors." There was a stunned silence. Then, "You what?" "The venue, the caterer, the florist, the DJ, everything under my name." His breathing got sharper. "I'm standing in a parking lot right now, and the coordinator is telling me there is no reservation. She said the contract was terminated. The caterer says we're not on the schedule. What the hell are you talking about?" I looked out across the unfinished building in front of me, sunlight hitting steel beams. Exactly what I said. He made this disbelieving sound, half laugh, half choke. "You canceled our wedding?" And there it was. Not "you canceled the contracts after I violated your trust." Not "I can't believe we're here." Just "you canceled our wedding." As if the wedding were some sacred thing floating above the people inside it. As if what he had done was a detail, and what I had done was the event. I said, "You removed 40 people from my side of the guest list without asking me and replaced them with your yoga clients. I told you about that. You texted me after you did it. That still counts as telling you." "No," I said quietly. "It counts as informing me that you'd already made the decision." He went silent for a beat, then his voice changed. Softer. Dangerously softer. The voice he used when he was trying to make something unreasonable sound enlightened. "Rachel, I really need you not to be reactive right now." I nearly laughed. Reactive. That was the word he had chosen. Not hurt, not furious, not betrayed. Reactive. As if I were a difficult emotional weather pattern he needed to wait out. "I'm not being reactive," I said. "I'm being clear." He exhaled hard. "You cannot cancel an entire wedding over a guest list adjustment." I leaned against the side of my truck. I didn't cancel it over an adjustment. I canceled it because the man I was about to marry decided my people were disposable. That is not what happened. That is exactly what happened. "No," he said quickly. "What happened is that I tried to make space for the people who have actually shown up for us. For me, for this relationship." There was something almost fascinating about the way he said it. Not like he was apologizing. Like he was still presenting a case. As if I might yet come around and admire his reasoning. I said nothing. So he kept going. "My studio community is part of my life, Rachel. It's part of who I am. These people have supported my work, my growth, my healing, everything I've built. They matter. My best friend matters." I didn't say she didn't. "You cut her." He paused. The pause told me more than the words ever could. He did remember who he had cut. This wasn't random. This wasn't abstract. He knew. I went on. You cut Danielle, who has known me since I was 9. You cut my cousins. You cut the women I went through trade school with. You cut coworkers who stood next to me when I got certified. You cut my father's best friend, who is basically family. You cut people who had already booked flights. He sounded irritated now, like I was making this messier than it needed to be. We had a capacity issue. No, we had a you issue. That's unfair. No, I said, and I could feel something in me turning from pain into steel. What's unfair is deciding that your students deserve seats at our wedding more than the people who actually built a life with me. Then he said the sentence that ended everything. Those people from your side aren't even important to the wedding. They're just people. My yoga community is part of my identity. I closed my eyes, not because I was overwhelmed, because in some strange, brutal way, I was relieved. There it was. No more euphemisms, no more journey, no more polished language about alignment and meaning and support. Just truth. My people were just people, and his were identity. When I opened my eyes again, the construction site looked sharper somehow, brighter, like the world had moved into focus. I said very calmly, I think we're done here. He went quiet. Then his voice came back loud and furious. Don't you dare say that to me right now. I almost admired the nerve of it, as if I were the one who had broken something sacred, as if the timing was rude. The engagement is over, I said. I'll have your things packed by the weekend. You can coordinate with your sister for pickup. He inhaled like he was about to shout again, but I ended the call before he could. For a few seconds, I just stood there with my phone in my hand. Then my hand started shaking. Not dramatically, just enough that I had to put the phone down on the truck bed and stare at it until the shaking passed. My apprentice, Luis, came around the corner carrying a toolbox. He took one look at my face, looked away just as quickly, and said, You want me to handle the riser room? I nodded. He nodded back like that was all that needed to be said. I appreciated him more in that moment than he'll probably ever know. That evening, Ethan's mother called. Of course she did. His mother, Vanessa, was a real estate agent with the energy of a woman who believed every room should eventually bend to her. She always dressed like she might accidentally end up in a listing photo and had a way of speaking that made even normal conversation sound like closing arguments. She didn't say hello. She opened with, You need to understand that my son is devastated. I was standing in the kitchen, opening a container of leftover pasta. Your son removed 40 people from my guest list without asking me. You are being cold. No, I said, setting the container down. I'm being accurate. She exhaled sharply through her nose. Ethan was trying to create a meaningful experience surrounded by people who support your union. My closest friends support our union. He cut them. He had to make difficult choices. I let that sit for a second. Then I said, No, Vanessa. He didn't have to make any choices. The list was already finalized. He decided to make choices because he believed he was entitled to. Her tone hardened. Whatever disagreement you had about the list, canceling everything like this was cruel. Cruel. That word almost got me. Not because it was true, because a part of me had already whispered it to myself the night before. Cruel to end it this way. Cruel to let him discover it in a parking lot. Cruel to say nothing. But another voice, steadier and older, answered back inside me. No, cruel was assuming the person you loved would absorb disrespect if you packaged it casually enough. She continued, My husband and I contributed $6,000 to that wedding, Rachel. We expect to be reimbursed. I pulled out a chair and sat down. I had already gone over the numbers twice. The $6,000 you and your husband contributed was applied to the caterer and florist. Those were canceled. Refunds came back to me because the contracts were under my name, but a significant amount was lost in penalties. That's not our fault. I stared at the wall. The framed print Ethan had insisted on hanging there suddenly looked ridiculous. Some beige abstract swirl with the word breathe in tiny gold script at the bottom. I said, It became your problem when your son made a unilateral decision that blew up the event. He made one guest list adjustment. He cut 40 people from my side. You are fixating on a number instead of looking at the spirit of what he was trying to create. I laughed then. I couldn't help it. A short, sharp laugh that sounded ugly even to me. The spirit? Yes, the spirit. He removed people who loved me and replaced them with clients. They are not just clients. To me, I said, they are. Silence. Then she said, low and icy, You are being incredibly calculating. I looked around the apartment I had shared with her son, the throw blanket he always left folded diagonally on the couch, the stack of yoga books on the coffee table, his ceramic incense holder by the window. Calculating. Maybe I was. Maybe women only got called calculating when they stopped volunteering to be taken advantage of. I work in fire suppression, I said. Calculating is part of the job description. She did not appreciate that. You think you're very clever. No, I think your son told me exactly who he was, and I believed him. She hung up on me after that, which was fine. I wasn't interested in winning her over. By Saturday morning, I had packed Ethan's things. All of them. Clothes folded, books boxed, toiletries separated, yoga props stacked neatly. I even wrapped the decorative crystals he kept on the bedroom shelf in bubble wrap. Because despite everything, I am not a monster. He didn't come himself. He sent his sister. Her name was Marissa, and unlike the rest of the family, she usually had enough self-awareness to look embarrassed by them. That morning, though, she arrived stiff-backed and furious, towing a small rental trailer behind her SUV. She stepped into the apartment, took one look at the labeled boxes lined against the wall, and said, "He wanted to come, but he knew you'd turn it into a scene." I almost smiled. A scene. As if I were the chaotic one here. "Everything's there," I said. "Kitchen stuff is in the smaller boxes. Clothes are grouped by room. Fragile items are marked." She crossed her arms. "I'm supposed to tell you that you're going to regret this for the rest of your life." For the first time all week, something almost light flickered in my chest. Not happiness. Something close to freedom. I said, "Maybe. But at least my best friend will be at the next wedding." Marissa just stared at me. For a second, I thought she might laugh. She didn't. She turned away and started carrying boxes out. It took about 40 minutes. No dramatic final conversation. No tears. Just the sound of footsteps, cardboard scraping the floor, the front door opening and closing again and again. At the very end, she came back in for the last load, looked around the apartment, and said more quietly, "You really mean it?" It wasn't quite a question. I met her eyes. Yes. She nodded once. Then she left the spare key on the counter and walked out. And just like that, the apartment went silent. Really silent. The kind of silence that arrives after something has been removed, not misplaced. I stood in the middle of the living room for a long time, looking at the spaces where his things had been. The rolled yoga mat by the entryway, gone. His jacket on the chair, gone. The mug he always used for tea, gone. For a moment, grief came at me sideways. Not because I wanted him back, but because I had spent 3 years learning the shape of a life that no longer existed. And even when the ending is right, the erasing still hurts. 3 days later, I got something in the mail. An actual letter, hand-addressed. The return address was Ethan's yoga studio. I stood in the kitchen, turning the envelope over in my hands, already suspicious. There was a faint scent of lavender clinging to it, which somehow made everything worse. Inside was a letter printed on studio letterhead, complete with a lotus flower watermark and the studio's name in delicate cursive across the top. It had been signed by 8 women. 8. Women from his yoga classes. I read it once in disbelief, then again slower. It said, and I am barely paraphrasing, that I had caused irreparable emotional harm to a man who brought healing and light to everyone he touched. That my inability to honor the value of spiritual community was the true reason the relationship failed. That I should reflect on the energy I was putting into the world. I lowered the paper and just stared at my refrigerator. 8 strangers had written me a group scolding on lotus flower stationery because I had refused to let my fiancé erase half my life for a curated audience. I should have been offended. Instead, I laughed so hard I had to sit down. Not elegant laughter, either. The kind that bends you in half and makes your eyes water. When I finally caught my breath, I grabbed a magnet and stuck the letter on the fridge. Not out of anger. Out of reverence. It was the funniest piece of mail I had ever received. And every morning after that, I looked at it while I drank my coffee and thought, this cannot possibly be my real life. I didn't know it yet, but things were about to escalate one more time before they finally settled. Because a few days after the letter arrived, his father called. His father's name was Robert Cole, and unlike the rest of Ethan's family, Robert didn't come in loud. He didn't accuse, he didn't perform. He called me on a Tuesday evening, right around the time I was finishing dinner, and when I picked up, his voice was calm, measured, almost tired. "Rachel," he said, "do you have a minute?" That was how I knew this conversation was going to be different. Robert had always been steady, a retired shop teacher, the kind of man who built furniture in his garage and fixed things instead of replacing them. He spoke slowly, like he believed words should be chosen, not thrown. We had always gotten along. He was one of the few people in Ethan's life who didn't try to impress me or correct me, or subtly reshape me into something softer. He just accepted me. "I know this is a mess," he said, "and I'm not calling to argue about what happened." I leaned back in my chair. "Okay. I don't agree with everything Ethan did," he continued, "and I don't agree with how things ended either, but that $6,000 aids, that's real money for us. There was no accusation in his voice, just fact. I understand, I said. I was hoping we could figure out something fair. Fair. That word landed differently than cruel. Fair implied balance, acknowledgement, responsibility. It didn't assume guilt. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with a stack of papers I had already gone through twice. Contracts, receipts, refund confirmations, cancellation policies. I spread everything out again anyway, because this time it wasn't about defending myself. It was about deciding who I wanted to be at the end of this. Here's what it looked like when I laid it all out. Total deposits I had paid across all vendors, $15,300. Total cancellation penalties, $4,800. Total refunds returned to me, $10,500. Ethan's parents' $6,000 contribution had gone toward the caterer and florist. Those vendors had refunded about $4,000 total. That $4,000 had come back to me. The remaining $2,000 of their contribution had been absorbed by cancellation penalties. Legally, I didn't owe them anything. The contracts were in my name. The deposits were mine. The refunds were mine. End of story. But this wasn't about legal. This was about Robert, a man who had written a check because his son was getting married. A man who had nothing to do with the guest list, nothing to do with the text, nothing to do with the letter on lotus flower paper currently sitting on my fridge. I could have said no. I could have said, your son created this situation. Your loss is between you and him. And I would have been right. But right and fair aren't always the same thing. I stared at the numbers for a long time. Then I pulled out my checkbook, wrote $4,000. Not the full $6,000. I wasn't going to absorb the penalty for Ethan's decision. But the portion that had actually come back from the vendors, that wasn't mine to keep. Sunday morning, I drove to Robert's house. It was quiet, modest. The same house he and his wife had lived in for years. There was a half-finished wooden bench on the porch, tools laid out beside it like he had stepped away mid-project. He answered the door in a flannel shirt, sleeves dusted with sawdust. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then I held out the check. This is what came back from the caterer and florist, I said. The rest was lost in penalties. I'm sorry. He looked down at it, then back up at me. And something in his expression softened. You didn't have to do this, he said. I know. He nodded slowly. You're a decent woman, Rachel. The word decent hit harder than I expected. Not kind, not generous. Decent, solid, reliable. The kind of person who doesn't twist when things get difficult. I wish things had worked out differently, he added. Me too, I said. And for the first time since all of this started, I meant it without hesitation. We shook hands. No hug. No lingering conversation. Just acknowledgement. Closure. That was the last time I spoke to anyone in Ethan's family, and I intended to keep it that way. Financially, when everything settled, here's what I was left with. $5,100 lost in cancellation penalties, plus the $4,000 I returned to Robert, minus the $10,500 in refunds I had received. Net loss? About $8,600. That's painful? Yes. But as I stood in my kitchen that night, looking at the numbers on my phone, I felt something unexpected. Not regret. Relief. Because I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. If Ethan could cut 40 people out of my life with a text message and a heart emoji, what would he do after the wedding? When it wasn't just a guest list, when it was holidays, weekends, friendships, family. Would I have to justify every relationship? Negotiate every invitation? Watch my life slowly shrink to fit inside his version of what mattered? The guest list hadn't been the problem. The guest list had been a preview. And I had seen enough. About a week later, I started hearing things. Not directly from Ethan. He never contacted me again. Everything came through other people. His mother, his sister, that ridiculous letter. But through a mutual friend, someone who had managed to stay neutral, I started to hear how the story had been told on his side. At first, Ethan told people I had canceled the wedding out of nowhere, that I had commitment issues, that I had panicked. But stories don't stay controlled for long. Not in tight communities. And definitely not in the kind of community he had built. Details started leaking. The guest list, the cuts, the replacements. And once people understood what had actually happened, something shifted. Not dramatically, not publicly, just quietly. A few of the women from his studio stopped showing up. At first, just one or two. Then more. Not a mass exodus, just a thinning. Because it turns out, Most people don't feel comfortable realizing they were invited to someone else's wedding, at the cost of the bride's closest friends. Within 2 weeks, his Tuesday and Thursday evening classes dropped from around 18 regulars to 11. 7 people gone. In a small studio with tight margins. That matters. Each client represented about $120 to $160 a month. Losing 7? That was roughly $900 to $1,100 in monthly income. I didn't tell anyone anything. I didn't call the studio. I didn't defend myself. The truth moved on its own. And there was something almost poetic about that. The same community he had prioritized over my relationships became the one that quietly held him accountable when they saw the full picture. I didn't celebrate it, but I noticed. And I learned something important. You don't always have to expose people. Sometimes, you just have to step out of the way and let them reveal themselves. The last thing I did before I really let it all go was call my friends, all 40 of them, one by one. Not to vent, not to drag Ethan, just to tell them, the wedding's off. I'm sorry for any inconvenience, and I want you to know you matter to me. Most of them didn't even care about the inconvenience. They cared that I called. My cousin, the one who had already booked international flights, laughed when I explained. I'm still coming, he said. We'll make something out of it. And 3 weeks later, he did. But that part deserves its own ending, because it wasn't about loss. It was about something else entirely. 3 weeks later, my cousin landed anyway. He texted me from the airport like nothing had changed. Baggage claim, don't make this weird. I smiled at my phone for the first time in days. We didn't reschedule a wedding. We didn't try to recreate anything. We did something simpler. My best friend Danielle offered her backyard. It wasn't large, just enough space for a folding table, a grill, and a handful of mismatched lawn chairs that had clearly lived several lives before that afternoon. There were no invitations, no seating chart, no curated aesthetic. Just people. 16 of them, to be exact. Danielle, my cousin. A few coworkers still in their work boots, showing up straight from job sites. 2 friends from college who brought a cooler full of drinks and absolutely no plan. Someone brought a speaker, someone else brought a dog. I brought burgers, buns, and enough beer to make sure no one thought too hard about anything. And for a few hours, it was perfect. No one asked careful questions. No one tiptoed around what had happened. They just showed up, talked, laughed, ate like we hadn't all been quietly holding our breath for weeks. At one point, I was standing by the grill, flipping something I had probably already overcooked, when my cousin came up beside me. You good? He asked. Same question he had asked me years ago, in a completely different moment of my life. I looked around, at Danielle arguing with one of my coworkers about music, at someone trying to teach the dog how to sit using a hot dog bun, at the sunlight hitting the edges of everything like it had decided to be kind for once. And I realized something. I think I am, I said. And this time, I didn't have to force it. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in my apartment. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. The framed print Ethan had loved? Gone. The incense holder? Gone. The faint scent of lavender that used to linger in the air? Gone. In their place, space. Clean, honest space. My savings account had taken a hit. Every time I checked the balance, I felt it. $8,600 isn't nothing. It's real. It's hours worked. Weekends given up. Decisions made carefully over time. But every time I felt that loss, I also felt something else. The absence of a problem that would have only gotten bigger. Because I kept coming back to the same thought, over and over again. If Ethan could remove 40 people from my life with a single message, what would he have done later? When it wasn't just a guest list, when it was Thanksgiving, when it was birthdays, when it was random Saturdays and quiet Sundays and who we chose to spend our lives around. Would I have had to argue for every person I loved? Would I have had to justify their place in my life? Would I have slowly learned to make myself smaller so his world could feel bigger? That's not a marriage. That's a negotiation you never win. The guest list wasn't the problem. No. The guest list was the preview. And I watched it. I understood it. And I chose not to buy the ticket. I still have the letter from his yoga studio. It's on my fridge, held up by a magnet shaped like a tiny wrench. Every morning, I look at it while I drink my coffee. 8 signatures. 8 strangers. Talking about energy and healing and light. My best friend came over last weekend to watch a game. She read it out loud in the most dramatic voice she could manage, hand over her heart like she was delivering a monologue on stage. We laughed until my ribs hurt. At one point, she asked if she could frame it. I told her no. I earned that letter, I said. I'm keeping it. She shook her head, still smiling. You're ridiculous. Maybe I am. But I sleep fine. The apartment is quiet. My work is steady. Overtime is there if I want it. And slowly, piece by piece, my savings account is rebuilding. Life didn't end. It just corrected itself. Ethan never contacted me again. Not once. Everything came through someone else. And eventually, it stopped coming altogether. Which is how you know something is truly over. Not when it explodes. Not when it ends in shouting. But when it fades. When the noise dies down. When the silence settles in and doesn't feel like something missing, but something resolved. So that's it. That's the story. I lost a wedding. I lost money. I lost a version of a future I thought I wanted. But I didn't lose myself. And that's the only part that was never negotiable. If you take anything from this, call your friends. Make sure they're still on your list. And if someone ever tries to quietly erase them, believe what that tells you. The first time. That's all.